Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Industry Insights. I'm your host, Leah Troscianecki, and I am joined today by my good friend, Anthony Spiteri, all the way over in Australia. Thank you for staying up late for us, Anthony.
Always a pleasure, Leah.
Absolutely. And speaking of pleasures, it is definitely our pleasure to talk to you guys today about 12.2, Veeam's latest innovation on our flagship solutions in Veeam Data Platform. And I think what's going to be really cool about this show is obviously you guys have lots of opportunities to put hands on keyboard and see what the latest innovations are all about. But hopefully we can connect some dots at a higher level so you all can understand kind of the strategy behind these latest innovations and how we're hoping that you and your organization use these innovations moving forward. As always, we would love to hear from you guys in the chat. So for today, I'd really love to hear from everyone what feature you're most excited about in 12.2. And if you don't know, that's okay too. We're going to highlight some of our favorites on this show in particular. But if you do have anything you're really excited to get your hands on, anything that you're hoping to hear from us today, please put that in the chat. We're also going to invite you guys to drop in where you're calling in from. For those who have never seen this show before, we actually have a really fun map feature that we'll put up a bit later in today's session here. But we'd love to light that map up with examples of where you all are from. So if you're tuning in from Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, let us know in the chat. And our production team will go ahead and light our map up, and we'll show that a bit later today. But with that, let's dive in a little bit on our topic, all about Veeam Data Platform 12.2. And there's really two trends that we're tracking with this release. The first one we want to talk about is all about migration and modernization of apps and infrastructure. And this is something that the Veeam team's been talking about a lot this year, especially given a lot of the kind of newsworthy elements that a lot of organizations are thinking about when they're looking at what they want to do with their infrastructure, whether that be significant outages that they need to be accounting for on things like tier 1 workloads, or maybe you're staring down a renewal bill with a platform vendor and seeing some astronomical price increases. Ultimately, Veeam is here to be the least prescriptive vendor on the market. We really believe in that freedom of choice. And not only is that a core principle of how Veeam develops solutions, but we also want to enable you guys to migrate data. So using things like backups to be able to move data to different locations, perhaps moving them to different platforms. We really want to be here to help with that migration and modernization process. So what you're seeing here on the screen are just some common ways that organizations typically look at moving data around. Of course, some of the common ones would be to retire a workload. It's possible to go ahead and just repurchase that in another location, especially if you're deciding to move something to a SaaS solution. So that tends to be where repurchase comes in. Veeam right now has an intranet site that runs on a SharePoint Exchange server, and we are moving that over to SharePoint Online. That is a repurchase. It's taking a lot of effort to move that data, move all of those sites over to SharePoint Online, but it's going to make it more sustainable moving forward. So of course, it's worth it for the Veeam team. The most common kind of ways that we expect you all to deal with this, though, will be in the rehost, replatform, and refactor categories. And of course, there's a wide variety of reasons that you might want to do one over the other. And we can definitely chat about that today. If you'd like us to dive deeper into that topic, let us know in the chat. But for now, I think, Anthony, what we want to do here is talk a little bit about some of the latest innovations in 12.2 and where they might fit into your migration and modernization plans. I think we start with maybe that rehost category, right? Because some of what's new for 12.2 are some new virtualization enhancements that we think a lot of folks are going to want to adopt right away. So maybe, Anthony, let's start with Proxmox. I'm pretty pumped to be working with the Proxmox team, right? There's a lot of small businesses that are excited to move to Proxmox. So what are you hearing?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, right? Because we've talked about data freedom across clouds as a core sort of pillar of what we've done for a long time, that mobility, the data platform, what we've been able to do, the portable data format. And in today's environment this year with this rehosting, being able to offer Proxmox support is huge, because as an alternative to VMware or to any other hypervisor, we've definitely seen its growth, especially in EMEA, where Proxmox is a French company based out of there, very strong in EMEA, but I also see it very strong in areas of APJ as well. So for us to look at the market and to support it and to do it quickly as well is really, really, excellent from the point of view of data freedom, but also data resilience across platform. So this is cool because straight away we've been able to come up with native support for Proxmox, immutable backups. We're able to bring in CBT integration from the start. So really not just plugging in at the most basic level. We're starting at already quite a high level by working with the Proxmox APIs that are already present in the system. And from my end, we've turned this around really quickly, Leah, right? So we've really seen the market shift in certain ways. We've seen, certain areas of the Broadcom acquisition cause tension. And from that perspective, we saw a lot of people going towards Proxmox. So we've been able to bring that in. I think it's a really big advantage, and it really adds, it's our sixth hypervisor when you think about Oracle Linux VM and Red Hat virtualization on top of AHV and the other ones that we've got as well, VMware and Hyper-V as well.
Yeah, and I think, something that kind of speaks to the kind of principles of where we see the data protection market moving. We could have, of course, slapped on an agent and said, yep, we've got support. Here's that RFP check, But I think that when you look at that effort versus impact of where the Veeam team wants to focus their time in research and development, offering platform native support, thinking about these critical capabilities like immutability, like change block tracking. We recognize that that's really important, especially because when we're looking at what gets hosted on these virtualization platforms, it is oftentimes these tier 1, these tier 2 workloads. So you need to be able to offer so much of that well-rounded support. So I think we're really passionate and excited to see that platform native approach.
And I think what's really great about it as well is it's about the full VM recoverability and the recovery capabilities that are in there from a granular perspective from day dot, right? So I think on stage at VeeamON, I demoed rather infamously, but got it at the end, as we know. But it was a kind of a boring demo because I think I even said it just worked. And so it was really hard to sort of make that pop. But the reality was, what we wanted to show was that in a quick time, we've been able to get an ability to take a backup from VMware, from Hyper-V, from a public cloud, and be able to then recover it into Proxmox, right? So I think seeing that just work is just a testament to us. And by the way, I've got to say rather cheekily, what we've seen in the industry with some of our contemporaries is that they've actually, come to the party as well, so to speak, with that feature at the same time. So I think we're pretty proud to be, pretty much first to market there from that perspective as well.
Definitely. That the first to market, I think, is something that we're super prideful of. We weren't necessarily first to market on the Nutanix front, though, but I think that a lot of the enhancements that we've made in this latest release are really exciting, especially offering that integration with Nutanix Prism Central. And Anthony, I know you chat with a lot of customers who use a lot of different hypervisors. Nutanix seems to be really gaining a lot of ground. And I think it was important for us to really push the boundaries of what we do support.
Yeah, look, we made a decision on AHV a while ago now. I think we're talking 2018, right? Like it was a long time ago that we supported this. And we've been incrementally improving the product as we've gone along. 12.2 has seen, like the Prism integration, which is their control plane, dynamic job scope, backup from secondary copy, things that you'd kind of almost expect at a VMware level or a Hyper-V level that we've brought into it very quickly. And again, rapidly again, to make sure that we respond to the market. And I have definitely come across a lot of AHV, especially interestingly in cloud repatriation, which is quite interesting. I had a couple of specific examples of companies taking workloads from the cloud and then actually bringing them back on premises and then having them land on Nutanix AHV. So that's quite interesting in itself.
Absolutely. And I think we'll continue to see that repatriation. You said it so much better than I did. Repatriate. No, I'm going to have you say it now because it just sounds better with an Australian accent.
Cloud repatriation.
There we go. I love it. Well, speaking of kind of moving the data around, I'm going to choose some simpler words here. One of the things we're really excited to see is more of that replatforming effort. And that's all the more reason why our new MongoDB support is so exciting. Anthony, I know when we were prepping for this episode, we talked a bit about the sheer market size of
Yeah.
MongoDB, just how many organizations use some level of MongoDB. Bringing that into the fold with the resilience story that we have, I think is going to be key.
Yeah, and to carry on, like obviously we know that VM still exists, but we know that data is shifting to different platforms and different types of storage. And in today's world, a database is storage. MongoDB is a NoSQL database. It's got roughly 44% of the market as well. It's huge, right, from that perspective. So, for us to support this at a very high level, like we've gone in hard straight away at an enterprise level to support this, I think it's a good feather in our cap, and it just shows that we're willing to look at where the data is shifting to. That data has gravity. We all know that. So as repurposing of data, maybe moving from on-premises, maybe you would have stored your data from an NoSQL perspective, maybe in a Cassandra database or something on-prem. If you're moving it into a MongoDB scenario from an enterprise level, we've got you covered now. So I think all of the features that we've brought in there to support MongoDB at the enterprise level and obviously, a couple of steps down as well is significant at the same time.
It definitely is significant. And I think we're going to continue to see more of those use cases around the database front. I know as, again, we look into that replatforming category of all the ways that we're supporting organizations who are replatforming. We offer new support now for Azure Cosmos DB. We've got new support for Amazon Redshift in here. We're even taking a look into the data lakes category. So we now offer support for Azure data lakes. Talk to us a little bit more about some of the cloud pieces of this specifically.
Yeah, so these obviously extend to, in terms of bringing in Veeam backup for public clouds into the Veeam backup replication or the Veeam platform at that point. So now built into that, deploying the solutions from the single UI into the public cloud. But then the ability now to go and protect, like what you said, I think that opens up again different places where data are residing. And in today's world, I mean, when you and I last chatted a couple of weeks ago, we talked about, or about a month ago now, maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, we talked about AI, right? And we talked specifically about how you're backing up AI. Well, I know that a lot of data that's being pulled into AI models actually lives on Azure Data Lake, as an example, or in Cosmos DB. So and actually, to be fair, MongoDB as well. So what we're seeing here is just extending our own ability to cover a workload no matter where it is. We all know that Veeam has been really good over the past, decade to expand where data can be protective outside of where we started, which was on a vSphere environment in a VMware scenario, and obviously Hyper-V as well.
Absolutely. I think that principle of resilience everywhere is really important. We're going to talk more about that, but speaking of being everywhere, I think it's good time to throw up that map that we have and just give you all a shout out in terms of all the reach that we have with a show like this. It's such a privilege to get to chat with you all around the world. So you can see kind of that big map overall. If we want to go ahead and double click into North America, I am calling in from the great state of Ohio. Go Bucks. We did have a great win this weekend. If you guys are going to be tuning in to a show with me over the next couple of months, I'm sorry, because I will continue to gloat about having one of the greatest football teams in North America. But we do also have production in Texas. We also have some folks joining us from Florida, Colorado, North Dakota, and California, where it is quite early in the morning. Thank you all so much for joining us. If we want to go ahead and move the map over to Europe, we have some folks joining us from the UK, Germany, as well as Romania. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And then if we go to South America, Brazil continues to have representation on the show. We really appreciate it. And shockingly, we have some APAC representation. Anthony, you have another person joining us, Raj, calling in from Perth as well.
Oh, wow,
so you are not alone.
There you go. Up late. It's midnight over here. So there you go.
Absolutely.
Hello, Raj. Thanks for listening.
Really appreciate it. That's super exciting. And again, guys, let us know in the chat where you are watching this show from. And also let us know if you have a favorite feature from 12.2 that you're really excited to take a look at. Evgeny on YouTube let us know that Proxmox support is the one that he's most excited for. Again, not surprised to see it. We heard a lot about Proxmox from our community. So it's really important that we continue to hear your guys' voices, because I think it definitely informs so much of what the Veeam team is trying to do moving forward, especially because our mission really is to think about resilience across all of these environments. Anthony talked a lot about different use cases for these various workloads, right? Looking at expanding use cases in AI, for example, helped inform some of why we had some of those cloud workloads included in our net new support in 12.2. But this is just going to continue to be something that is really important to the Veeam team. And again, we could just slap an agent on it and call it a day. But I think we recognize that that platform native support is so important, because we recognize that when it comes to resilience, a lot is at stake and there's a lot of threats to resilience. So our commitment is that we will continue to offer extensive workload coverage that is completely unmatched in the industry. We don't want to see these situations where organizations are having to use 6, 7, 8, 9 different tools, because the more tools you have to use, the more risk that is going to be introduced into these environments. And as we're looking again at some of these news-making headlines of what's happening in various industries, we see the impact of platform outages. We see the impact of cybersecurity attacks. In my own city in Columbus, Ohio, we actually just recently had a major cybersecurity attack where there was a data exfiltration event. Now, of course, we are on the backup and recovery side, so we can't do a lot on the exfiltration front, but we will continue to push the boundaries on what backup can do in that security space. So again, just kind of increasing that urgency and relevancy of some of these innovations that we are executing. And a big part of that comes down to this principle of zero trust. And that brings us to our second trend that we're excited to talk about. You know, there's lots of frameworks and best practices in the security space. Here at Veeam, we spend a lot of our time talking about zero trust, this idea that you should assume breach at every stage of your environment. And hopefully this kind of graphic gives you a picture of that. That little red icon in the corner of each box tells us that we need to assume breach at every step of the process. And in fact, our research tells us that in ransomware attacks, 96% of ransomware attacks included an attack on the backup infrastructure, and it was successfully infiltrated 76% of the time. Now, that survey was done not specifically of Veeam customers. It was 4,500 IT leaders worldwide who use a wide variety of tool sets, but it just illustrates how common it is to go after that backup infrastructure. So part of why we're so passionate about platform native support and some of these other things that we're pushing is to also make sure that we're always offering that immutable coverage as well, because the idea of putting immutability everywhere is so key. Even though it's expensive, sometimes depending on how you architect it, right, we think it's super important. So Anthony, anything you want to kind of crack open on this zero trust concept? And obviously we'll talk about some of the features too.
Yeah, no, I think, look, it's all just about, again, assuming breach, but also understanding that we've been working tremendously hard since, you know, especially the last couple of releases. 12.1 was a big step up from a security perspective. In fact, we kind of labeled that a security release, right? Almost. It was that type of release where we really did a lot around the threat center, the best practice that we have, the analyzer that sits there and effectively lists down what an admin should be looking for, how they tighten that environment to make sure that they can, you know, have the best chance of surviving an attack. Because if an attack happens, you know, the backup environment is going to be targeted first. We know that. So beyond immutability, which is default and should beyond the 3-2-1 rule, which we used to talk about, Leah, you know, at nauseum, you know, back in the day, it's now really thinking
Over
about
a
how do you
decade.
protect a long time, right? But now how do you then, that's just part of it now. That's part of this. And it doesn't really even feature on this zero trust data slide that you're seeing here. But how do you make sure that your actual backup platform, being the Veeam platform, is ready to go just in case something does happen? multi-factor authentication, little bits of security things that you can, settings that you can put on the system. And we continue to add these particular features into the platform as well to make sure that can keep going. So yeah, look, it's very important. It's more of a process than anything. And we're definitely committed to continuing to improve the platform to make sure that you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of those improvements is also going to be trying to be as proactive as possible. So if you notice down at the bottom of this diagram, we have a couple of elements of what we're calling security signals, right? This idea that if you want to be proactive, or even if you're being reactive, be confident in what you're doing on the security side. We have some really exciting innovations that we continue to push. Obviously, as Anthony said, a lot of these were introduced in our last major release of Veeam Data Platform, but we continue to push enhancements in these categories with each of these releases. So for those who don't know, one of the big things that we innovated on in the last release is inline malware detection. So as I said, when we know that backup infrastructures are often attacked in these cyber incidents, it stands to reason then that if you can proactively analyze what's going on with your backups, you might find an early signal, right? So we're really, really excited about this feature, and we really hope that you all in the community are using it. And something that I think will help with that is also taking a look at some of the integrations that we continue to push in the security space. So we'll throw up a slide in just a second that kind of shows some of those security partnerships. But before I get to that, one of the things we also wanted to talk about is Yara scanning. Now, Anthony, would you like to educate everyone who doesn't know, what does Yara stand for? It is one of our favorite acronyms.
Yeah, well, from the point of view of inline malware detection first, I think it's important to point out that, we released that in 12.1. We've made significant increase into its efficiency in 12.2 as well, reduced the amount of false positives, made it more efficient in being able to do its data processing, because that is an inline process, right? So looking at the blocks of data that are passed through the backup proxy, we're working out levels of entropy, which is effectively like saying, what levels of encryption have happened. If there's a high level of encryption, we're using some AI algorithmic-based formulas to work out and flag it as being, and that's that little sort of bug icon that you see there. We're going to flag it in the Veeam Backup Replication Console to say that this is suspicious. So it's important to work out that that's happening in time. Now, we can also work, and I think we're going to talk about it in the next slide, with our partnerships through our incident API. We can work with external vendors where, from a two-way perspective, we can get them to say, hey, something's not quite right on this particular VM that we're scanning. We're going to tell Veeam that there's potentially an issue and flag it. Then we can go the other way. So we've actually added a bit more of an RBAC capability into that API operator role as well, which is very important. From a Yara perspective, so effectively it's like regex on steroids. So those that know about regex, it's a way to basically look at signatures of files, extension of files. It's very configurable from a Yara perspective, so you can actually dictate the rules. You can create your own rules, put it into the platform, and it'll search based on those rules. Now, we've got certain extensions that we search for by default. You can add your own extensions. You can actually do exclusions as well. It's very important. So that 1-2 punch of having the malware detection being the inline, very efficient at detecting entropy, versus the Yara, which is really looking at onion links and other sort of indications on the file system of something being nasty there. Really go towards that zero trust model, okay? Because straight away you're actually looking out for what's wrong on the platform before you might even know, okay? Now, it's interesting because typically, Leah, I think backup, the way that backup is even framed from a word, backup, so it's kind of like in the back, it's secondary, right? But we're having tremendous success with this feature in surfacing nasties that were on these systems that hadn't been picked up before. Like clients have turned this on and they've found malware lying there dormant. And that's really important, right? So, that's happening in the industry as a whole. And if we can then work with our ecosystem partners to do what they do at the front end really well, if we're looking at the data going into the system as it's being backed up, we're really protecting them from all sides.
Absolutely. And let's talk about some of that ecosystem, because I think this really illustrates so much of what Veeam is passionate about on both ends, right? On the one hand, you have us really focusing on platform native support of so many workloads, adding new workloads with each release. But the same thing goes for kind of platform support, if you will, on the security side, because we recognize more and more that backup and recovery play a critical function in the security space. And again, not just in terms of recovering data, but to also perhaps be an early signal of some of that malicious activity. So if you look at this kind of slide here, you can see what some of our current partnerships look like. But you really should keep a beat on what Veeam is doing, because we continue to announce more alliance partnerships with these critical integrations, every couple of weeks, every couple of months. I know we have one coming up here very soon with a very big vendor, so that's something to stay tuned for. But in the meantime, Anthony, let's maybe break down some of the categories of these integrations to wrap our show here. So maybe let's start with malware detection and secure restore, which secure restore has been around for a long time, right? It's not some fad that we're, just jumping on right now. Secure restore has been a part of our story since I think version 11, right?
I think it was actually V10 potentially, but it could have been there. I've got memories of that. I mean, that was a while ago now, but I think, I mean, obviously this is all about being able to leverage antivirus tools, AV tooling of your choice. Again, we're going about that freedom, to the choice to bring your own, being agnostic. We see that throughout, this narrative that we talk about at Veeam, and it's part of what makes us great and valuable to our customer base. But yeah, really just being able to scan a restore in real time for AV, for any virus that might be out there. So interesting. Look, it does have its detractions because it can be a bit slow, which is why, if you can do it inline and then more post in the Yarrow way to look for almost similar sort of extensions that might be created by a virus, that's really smart, but it's still very, very significant as well. So, I think that'll continue to develop. Watch the space there, because, that is one area that I think we can definitely do better on in terms of how do we innovate this particular point.
Definitely. And if you've got a platform of choice that we don't support, let us know in the chat. I think it's good to continue to get that community-based feedback. Something where we do have a lot of coverage is on the key management side. And of course, again, this is kind of table stakes, but it is very easy for vendors to just create their own key system and call it a day. But we do the work to build these kinds of integrations, and we recognize that it is a very saturated space. So spending more and more time on these integrations, I think, will be key. Where we think a lot of the innovation is going to come from is on that security incident and event management side, SIM, right? And again, just to tease, we do have, I think, a really exciting announcement coming in a couple of weeks. So that's good to stay tuned on that front. But Anthony, do you want to talk a little bit about the SIM side of things?
Yeah, and I think this is where I talked about ecosystem, letting the professionals in the space do what they do really well, right? So for Splunk, what we've got in the works is more industry leading security companies that do this sort of work. And if we can then offer our platform to do two-way communication between what they do really well, the customer's winning. And what it also means that a customer can keep their existing investment in. I think that's a very important part, right? We realize, much like what we've done with storage, there's customers have existing investment, and we want to make sure that we let them realize that investment. So if they're happy using Sophos, they're happy using Splunk for the tooling that does, all well and good. We're not going to try and replace that. So the Splunk app, as an example, for monitoring the health and security status of Veeam backup environments, integrating with the Splunk dashboards. And I've got to tell you, the Splunk dashboards look really, really sexy as well. If you look at the integration, it's a really cool looking integration from the point of view of the alerts and reporting. So I like this one because from the point of view of the story that we talk about, end to end, let the security companies be the security companies, let the log companies do the logging, and then we'll work with them to basically make sure that if something does happen, we can react to it, or they can tell us that something's happening at the same way.
Absolutely, because it is a team effort, right, at the end of the day. And I think we recognize that so often it's about IT teams reaching across the aisle to security teams, your governance, risk, compliance, SOC, you name it. It's really important that we play in the sandbox with each other And that means that we can't always just take our toys and run home, right? Having our own tools for something. The more that we can integrate as an ecosystem, the better it's going to be for IT and security teams to come together, to join forces, and to try to do what's needed to, again, assume breach, plan for the worst, but then be ready if the worst does in fact happen with a unified strategy. So that's the soapbox moment that Anthony and I will leave you guys with. One thing that I would love to highlight is, of course, some upcoming events that we have. We have the Veeam on Data Resilience Summit happening October 1st and October 2nd. So Raj is joining us from Perth. That will be October 2nd for you, not October 1st like it is for me in the States. But we would love to have you all join that online free event. We will be having some really great partnerships featured on the agenda, as well as some really exciting demos and other announcements coming. So be sure to register for that event, get that on your calendar. In terms of this week, we do have a great Tech Bites episode coming to you on Thursday. It is hosted by our V100 group, and it will be a bit of a teaser for our upcoming hackathon. So be sure to join the Tech Bites team on Thursday. I'll be back with you all next week for another Industry Insights episode. For that, thank you all so much. And Anthony, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Leah.
Have a great show. Bye.